Being our first episode of Paranormal History, we felt it only right to tell the story of two people who not only dedicated their lives to paranormal research, but were some of the first to really bring these ideas into the public eye. The Warrens have almost become synonymous with the idea of paranormal research. If you were to ask anyone interested in this stuff, who were the Warrens, they would not only recognize the name, but be excited to talk about them. Many of the Warrens' cases have not only become legend in the paranormal community, but have been adapted by both film and TV. Now, before I get ahead of myself, I think it's important to remember that all incredible stories have a beginning starting with one person, or in this case, two. Edward Warren was born on September 7th, 1926. Ed grew up in a quiet Connecticut town in a not-so-quiet Connecticut home. From the age of 5, Ed is quoted remembering continual paranormal activity throughout his household. These experiences included audible footsteps, heavy breathing, shadow figures, and glowing orbs of energy he would later call ghost globules. According to the Warrens' website, Ed recalls his father telling him, quote, "Ed, there's a logical reason for everything that happens in this house," end quote. Although his father was never able to find those explanations. These experiences resonated with Ed and would later become his inspiration and obsession with the paranormal. Believe in this sort of thing or not, fate has a funny way of bringing together two people who seem to be destined to be together. In Ed's case, he met just that person. At the age of 16, he met a young woman named Lorraine Moran while working at the Colonial Theater in Bridgeport, Connecticut. After walking Lorraine home one night, Ed is quoted as saying, quote, "And that's how it all got started," end quote. Jump ahead in time, and Ed has joined the Navy, survived a sinking ship, married Lorraine, survived World War II, and they had their first daughter together. Ed and Lorraine made their living off of Ed's artwork. It was through their artwork the Warrens began their paranormal investigations. The Warrens' website has Ed quoted as saying, quote, "I'd go out in the middle of the road where they could all see me and I'd start to sketch the house, and you'd see the curtains go back and forth," end quote. Lorraine would then approach the owners of the home and explain how her husband loved sketching haunted homes. From there, Ed and Lorraine began to take their research more and more seriously. Ed eventually became a self-proclaimed demonologist. Now, demonology is the systematic study of demons or beliefs about demons. It is a branch of theology relating to supernatural beings who are not considered to be gods. Whew. And Lorraine, a professed clairvoyant and light trance medium. Now, clairvoyance is the alleged ability to obtain information about an object, person, location, or physical event through extrasensory perception. And trace mediumship is often seen as a form of mental mediumship. Most trace mediums remain conscious during communication periods, wherein a spirit uses the medium's mind to communicate. It wasn't until 1970 that the Warrens would encounter their first, quote-unquote, famous haunt. A nursing student named Donna was given a used Raggedy Ann doll from her mother as a gift. Donna lived with her roommate Angie at the time, and for a while, life with the doll seemed normal. This normality was unfortunately for the girls short-lived. After some time, the girls began noticing strange activity from the doll. The girls are quoted explaining how the doll would seem to move on its own. It began as small shifts in position to moving from the bed to the couch, etc. Things escalated to where Donna began finding handwritten notes and blood-like fluid seemingly coming from the doll itself. Donna and Angie had had enough and eventually brought in a sensitive to try and figure out what was going on with this doll. After spending some time with the doll, the sensitive told the girls that the doll had been possessed by a young girl named Annabelle Higgins, who had been found dead in a field that their home was built upon. Being compassionate people, the girls decided to keep Annabelle with them. Unfortunately for the girls, the paranormal experiences surrounding Annabelle began to become more insidious in nature. Lou, Angie's fiancé, began having nightmares where Annabelle would attack him while he was paralyzed in the bed. Lou would wake up feeling extreme anxiety and pounding headaches. Lou also reported being scratched and burned by unseen forces. Eventually, enough was enough, and the Warrens were called in to evaluate the doll. The Warrens proclaimed relatively quickly that the doll was in fact being possessed by an inhuman spirit. The doll was immediately confiscated from the girls and is now kept in the Warrens Occult Museum. The story of Annabelle inspired a movie that was released in theaters in 2014. Hollywood, being Hollywood, they made sure to put their own spin on the story to provide the audience with an overly exaggerated story of the famous haunting. Seriously, look at the real-life doll, and now look at the Hollywood doll. That thing is terrible. The Warrens' next big case began in 1970. The Perron family, Roger and Caroline, and their 5 children, wanted to move into a larger home to accommodate for their ever-growing family. The family settled on a large home found in Harrisville, Rhode Island. The Perron family soon realized that they were not the only residents of this large Rhode Island home. The family is on record explaining how they shared their home with a multitude of spirits. The family's experiences in the home range from friendly, such as random smells of flowers filling a room, to playful, such as items or chairs being moved or misplaced, and then they had violent and terrifying. Carolyn Perron seemed to receive the brunt of these terrifying and violent experiences. Carolyn described an encounter with an apparition at the edge of her bed. She described the woman as old, wearing a gray dress with quote-unquote vermin crawling out of her wrinkles on her face. The woman spoke to Carolyn, telling her to get out or I'll drive you out with death and gloom. These experiences included being smacked, pinched, disembodied voices, and having marks found on her leg that left Carolyn bloodied as if someone had stuck her with a sewing pin. It wasn't until Carolyn felt as if the spirit was trying to invade her from within that she decided to contact the Warrens for help. During their investigation, the Warrens had concluded that the spirit creating this terror was named Bathsheba Sherman. Bathsheba was an alleged witch that lived on and cursed the location in the 19th century. In order to rid Carolyn of Bathsheba, the Warrens performed an exorcism. One of the Perron's daughters is quoted as saying, quote, "The night I thought I saw my mother die was the most terrifying night of all. She spoke in a voice we had never heard before, and a power not of this world threw her 20 feet into another room." Unfortunately, the Warrens were unable to rid the family of their unwelcome spirits, and Robert asked them to leave due to the increase in activity created by their presence. The Perron family were forced to stay in their home for 10 years due to economic hardships, until they finally moved to Georgia in 1980. Personally, being born on Long Island, New York, I grew up with the story of the Amityville Horror House. Stories surrounding the house include blood dripping from the walls, to possessions, to the house itself speaking to the occupants. Now, before we get crazy here, let's stop and start from the beginning. On November 13th, 1974, Ronald DeFeo ran into a local bar screaming for help that his family had been shot and killed. Ronald DeFeo Sr., 43. Luis Brigante DeFeo, 42. Dawn DeFeo, 18. Allison DeFeo, 13. Mark Gregory DeFeo, 11. And John Matthew DeFeo, 9. All lost their lives that night in November. Ronald confessed to his family's murder shortly after being apprehended, and is now sentenced to 6 consecutive life sentences. There are some strange things that surround this murder. First, none of the neighbors ever heard a gunshot that night. 2, the family members were all found in their beds, as if they had no idea that this was going on in the house. During the autopsy, they found no drugs in the systems of any of the family members. This being the case, it is extremely strange that none of the family members were alerted after the first shooting. 13 months passed, and the house was left vacant. On December 18th, 1975, getting a great deal on the home, obviously, the Lutz family moved into the now quiet Amityville home. George and Kathy, along with their children, Christopher and Missy, settled in for the long haul. Being that the house had a horrible past to say the least, George and Kathy decided to have the house blessed by a priest. Allegedly, the priest had experienced cold spots all throughout the house, and had heard voices that he did not mention until, spoilers, the Lutzes had left the home. From day one, the Lutzes experienced strange circumstances such as cold spots and strange sounds throughout the house. These experiences became more serious as time went on, and some experiences included foul, rotten odors, loud voices, and there was even an instance where George woke up to his wife looking as if she had turned into a 90-year-old woman. After only 28 days in the DeFeo home, the Lutzes could no longer live in the house. The family fled to Kathy's mother's home in nearby Babylon. Cue the Warrens. 20 days after the Lutzes fled the house, Ed and Lorraine were called in by Marvin Scott, who was a news reporter for the Channel 5 News. During their investigation, Ed reported being physically pushed to the floor. Lorraine was reportedly overwhelmed by a demonic presence that would plague her with the images of the murdered DeFeo family. After reviewing their evidence, there was one piece of compelling evidence captured during the investigation. The child in this photo was supposedly not present when the picture was taken, and it looked suspiciously like John Matthew DeFeo. The story of the Warrens is without question compelling and haunting. Although controversy surrounds their cases, people cannot help but be compelled by them. Unfortunately, Ed Warren passed away on August 23, 2006, at the age of 79. Lorraine can still be found running the Warrens Occult Museum, which is found in Monroe, Connecticut. Welpers, that's the end of the first episode of Paranormal History. Hope you guys enjoyed. You could check back in or check ParanormalWarehouse.com on YouTube for our other awesome shows. Until next time, goodbye.